Your best friend said he wanted to be a father, so I slept with him and got pregnant. My wife confessed the affair. Our daughter sided with her. So I forced them to face the consequences. I was standing in that sterile hospital room, the air thick with disinfectant and death. Aaron lay there, the man who had once been my brother in all but blood, now pale and gasping through a mask. My wife stood behind me, trembling, carrying his child. I leaned closer to him, my voice calm, too calm, and whispered the words that made his monitor scream. That was the moment I realized what I had become. Not a husband, not a friend, just a man hollowed out by betrayal, watching the life drain from the one who had stolen everything. Let me tell you everything from the beginning. I had always been the kind of man people felt at ease with. At 45, my calm voice and easy smile made me a familiar and comforting presence in Milford, Texas, a quiet and close-knit rural community of fewer than 1,000 souls. I lived with my wife Penelope, my high school sweetheart, and our 17-year-old daughter, Han, in a modest house at the south end of town, not far from where both our parents lived. We Browns were well-rooted in Milford. Sunday community meals, school fundraisers, church services. I was there. Everyone knew me. Everyone liked me. He's just constant, Pastor Hulkin once said during a sermon, nodding toward me in the congregation. Like the North Star. Hey, Elliot, the sheriff would shout as he drove through town. Are you going to fix that coffee maker in my office, or are you going to keep taking your sweet time? I would laugh, adjusting my tool belt. I'm saving you from your caffeine addiction, Dale. They should be paying me for that. People trusted me. Kids waved as I passed in my rust-colored pickup truck. The elderly had my number on sticky notes next to their phones. My daughter Hannah had just been accepted into a summer music camp in Austin. She played the violin, and her talent had grown beyond what the local school could offer. Penelope had been beaming for days. I can't believe it, she said one night, folding laundry while I fixed the loose handle on a kitchen cabinet. She's really leaving. Our little girl isn't so little anymore. I responded, pausing to look out the window where Han was on the porch swing, humming something I didn't recognize. Penelope sighed. It seems like just yesterday we brought her home. I nodded. She's going to do great things. Things were going well. The next morning, I visited Mrs. Watkins to fix a faulty switch. She served me sweet tea, as she always did. You have such a good family, Elliot, she said softly. Not many people are as blessed as you. I know, I replied with a smile. Believe me, I thank God every day. But even as I said it, something in my chest tightened. I didn't know why. Later that night, long after Penelope and Han had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch. The crickets chirped and the stars blinked softly overhead. I rubbed my thumb against the calloused edge of my palm. Something wasn't right. The feeling wouldn't go away. It was like a shadow in a doorway. It was about to open, and what would come in would be something very dark. They say fate has a way of announcing its arrival, not with a thunderclap, but with a whisper that slips into ordinary days, changing everything. For me, it came with a knock on the door and the return of Aaron Walker. Aaron had once been my shadow, or maybe it was the other way around. As kids, we ran through the dusty roads of Milford as if we owned the world, two boys who thought time was a long road stretching to the horizon, but life had other plans. Aaron chased ambition out of Milford while I stayed, marrying Penelope and putting down roots in the same land we had both dreamed of escaping. Now, Aaron was back, but he wasn't the same. He stood on my porch one gray morning with a pale face, sharp cheekbones, and eyes dimmed by pain and fatigue. He looked 20 years older, not just physically, but in spirit. The diagnosis had torn something from him. Stage 4 blood cancer. Aaron said quietly as we sat on the porch that afternoon, drinking glasses of sweet tea. The doctors gave me a year. Maybe. I didn't speak at first, just looked out at the field across the road, the wind brushing the tips of the grass like a sigh. You should have told me sooner, I said finally, my voice breaking. Aaron managed a weak laugh. It would have ruined the surprise. I turned to him. Aaron smiled faintly. But you still love me, always. From that moment on, I took it upon myself to care for my friend. I drove him to Baylor Scott and Wyden-Baxhachi for his appointments. I helped him pick up his medications. I cleaned his house on weekends when the nausea was too strong. And when I couldn't be there, Penelope often stepped in. At first, I was grateful. Penelope had always been nurturing. She had that sweetness that drew people in. She cooked for Aaron, changed his sheets, did his grocery shopping. Sometimes she brought over board games to distract him. She even rearranged her work hours to help more often. But soon, I noticed small changes. Dinners at home became quiet. Penelope missed more family meals. Then, one night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the dishes were cleared. The clock ticked louder than usual. The following week became harder to ignore. Penelope spent hours running errands, even when she was home. One night, she left right after dinner, saying he had a rough chemo day. I stood by the door as she grabbed her purse. I could go. He asked for me, she said quickly, not meeting my eyes. Pen, I said softly. You've been spending more time there than here. She turned. He needs help. He's not the only one. I replied, the words firmer than I intended. She blinked, surprised. What are you saying? I'm saying this house feels empty when you're not in it. That's when the first real crack appeared. Days later, it widened. It was a Thursday night. I had just gotten back from replacing a power line at the Henderson farm. The house was dark. Hans' room was closed. A plate covered with foil sat on the table, a cold roast. I sighed, washed up, and served myself a plate. I had barely taken a bite when Penelope came in. Did you eat? She asked, setting down her keys. Just started, I answered without looking up. She walked past me to the sink. Did you talk to Han today? She was with her friends, Penelope replied. I stood up, putting my fork down. Penelope, we need to talk. She froze. I took a deep breath. This can't go on. I understand Aaron is sick. I get it, but this is our home, our daughter, our life, and you've been. He's dying, Elliot, she snapped, turning sharply. He has no one. And what are we? I said, raising my voice for the first time in months. Chopped liver. She stared at me, blinking. Pain crossed her face. I'm not choosing him over you, she said quietly. But it feels like it, doesn't it? I whispered. Silence. Then she turned away. I'm going to check on him. Did he have a rough day? Of course he did, I muttered bitterly. Too low for her to hear. Or maybe not. The door closed behind her, and I was left alone in my own kitchen. The shadows on the walls stretched longer than ever. The days turned into weeks, and the silence between Penelope and me grew heavier than any words we could muster. What was once a marriage filled with shared glances, soft touches, and whispered late-night jokes had become a ritual of silence. The bed we had shared for over 2 decades now felt like foreign territory. Every night, Penelope would come in quietly, lie down beside me without a word, often with her back to me. I tried once or twice to talk, to tell her how Aaron had reacted to his treatment, or how his appetite had improved, or how weak he felt after the last round of chemo. But each time, I would get out of bed and leave the room. Sometimes I would sit in the dark living room. Sometimes I would go out on the porch and watch the night, listening to the wind whisper through the dry Texas trees. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse her, but the silence I gave back was louder than anything else. One night, as I sat at the kitchen table drinking a glass of water, Hen came into the room. She was still in her school clothes, her backpack half open. Dad, she asked cautiously. I looked up. Why is Mom never home? She asked, not angry, just confused. She's always at errands, even on weekends. I put the glass down gently, and then stood up. You should ask your mother, I said without emotion, and walked past her down the hall. That night, Hen did. She knocked on Penelope's door as she was folding laundry in the master bedroom. Can we talk? Penelope looked up. Of course. They moved to Han's room. The doors closed behind them. No one heard what was said, but the house remained quiet for a long time. The next day, Penelope left in the morning with a casserole dish and her car keys. Like every other day that week, she spent most of the afternoon with Aaron, helping him eat, making sure he could get to the bathroom safely, organizing his pills by the hour. When she returned just after sunset, she came in with dusty shoes and hands smelling of antiseptic, but something felt wrong. She turned toward the hallway and stopped. Our bedroom door was open, but the space inside was stripped of her presence. Her clothes were gone from the closet. Her framed photographs from the dresser, gone. Her perfume, her slippers, her robe, everything was gone. She ran down the hall to the guest room, and there they were, folded and stacked on the bed, her things, her dresses, her scarves, her books. Even the small jade plant she kept on the windowsill had been moved. She stood there, stunned. Pulling out her phone, she dialed my number. The call rang and rang without an answer. Elliot, she whispered to the silent room. What are you doing? But deep down, she already knew. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't made a scene, but I had drawn a line. And with that silent gesture, everything between us changed. That night, I sat alone in the break room at the fire station, staring at the old framed photos on the wall. Pictures of the town's 4th of July parades. A group shot of volunteers, me and Aaron among them, younger, laughing with our arms around each other's shoulders. I couldn't hate Aaron, he was dying, but Penelope, she wasn't, and yet she had slipped away, little by little. The man Milfer once knew, gentle, patient, always with a kind word, was changing silently, steadily. The sweetness in me was fading, replaced by something harder, something colder. I didn't slam doors, I didn't shout, but my silence was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of something dying. And though I couldn't say it out loud yet, I knew it in my heart. My marriage would never be the same. The days in our house grew even quieter, as if the walls themselves had learned to hold their breath. I no longer spoke to Penelope, not in the morning, not at dinner, not even in passing. I moved through the house with a silent efficiency, my presence reduced to footfalls, the rustle of my jacket, the sound of car keys being dropped on the counter. I was still there, but in the way a ghost might be, ever present, never truly seen. The family dinner had become a memory. The table that once hosted laughter, conversation, and Sunday roasts now sat largely untouched. I ate alone, if I ate at all, usually in the garage or on the porch with a thermos of coffee, and often took her plate to her room. Penelope noticed everything, but she didn't know how to fix it. Or maybe she didn't try hard enough. She made attempts. Some mornings, she would wake before dawn and fry eggs just the way I liked them. She'd leave the container near the toaster, as she always had, a silent gesture, an olive branch wrapped in foil. But every time she came back later, the box was untouched. She knew what it meant. One morning, she lingered at the door as I tied my boots. "Elliot, I made you breakfast," she said quietly. I didn't look up, never looked toward the source of the sound. I just grabbed my keys and walked past her. To me, she was no longer a voice, just a distant sound I was now going to ignore. She stood there silently for a long time, looking at the empty space I had just left behind. I didn't have to say anything. My silence was eloquent. My eyes, when they met hers in passing, said everything my mouth refused to say. "Why aren't you here with us? Why is my wife away from me?" Penelope continued with her days. She still went to errands, still brought him soup, washed his sheets, helped him through the pain and the appointments. But at night, when she walked past our old bedroom and saw the door still closed, her heart twisted. She didn't knock. She told herself I was just jealous, that I still loved her, that I was angry now, but I would come around. I always did. In her mind, this was temporary. She stood in front of the mirror one night, brushing her hair, her reflection pale in the dim light of the guest room. "He's 45 years old," she whispered to herself. "He's not going anywhere. He's mine. I'm his wife. I will never divorce him." She smiled faintly at her own words. But what Penelope never realized, what she never allowed herself to understand, was that even the kindest man has limits. Even a heart that gives without asking for anything in return eventually grows tired of being ignored. And when you take an honest, loving man for granted, when you mistake his silence for surrender, that love can turn to hate in a matter of moments. That night, the sky over Milford hung low with heavy clouds, swollen with the threat of rain but unwilling to burst. The kind of sky that made everything feel a little quieter, a little more tense. Penelope came home earlier than usual. She didn't go to the guest room. She sat in the living room, watching the door, waiting for me to come back, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater, her heart an unsteady drum. At 4 p.m., the front door opened. Boot on wood. The familiar clatter of keys dropping into the bowl by the entrance. I didn't look at her, didn't say a word. I walked straight down the hall and into the bedroom. The door closed with a soft click. Penelope stood up, walked over, and knocked. "Elliot," she said softly, "I want to talk to you." Silence. She knocked again, this time louder. "Please, open the door." Still nothing. She rested her forehead against the door. "Aaron's in the hospital," she whispered. "The doctor says his heart is giving out. He doesn't have much time." Inside, I sat on the edge of the bed. Her words hit me like a slow-motion train, inevitable and cruel. My chest tightened. Aaron, my oldest friend, The boy with whom I had shared secrets, the young man who left town with dreams, the man who came back only to die. He was fading now, and yet, he was also the reason everything had fallen apart. But was he? I clenched my fists. He's dying, I reminded myself. Why am I still blaming him? I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked to the door. The knob turned, and the door opened slowly. Penelope was there, her eyes swollen, her hands clashed in front of her. When she looked at my face, she immediately looked down. She couldn't hold my gaze. I looked at her for a long, silent moment. I saw her trembling lips, her guilt, her shame, and I knew it wasn't over. What else? I asked dryly. Penelope's eyes stayed low. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm pregnant. Time stopped. The hallway was so quiet that even the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed deafening. I stood still, motionless. Then, finally, I asked, how far along? It wasn't the question Penelope expected. She hesitated. Her voice broke. 3 months. My face didn't move. It's not mine, is it? Penelope's head snapped up. Tears instantly flooded her eyes. It's not yours, Elliot. It's... I stepped closer. My eyes, so familiar and once full of warmth, were now cold, empty pits. Let's get a DNA test, I said, my voice calm, distant. Why don't I trust you? Penelope gasped. Her knees went weak, and before she could recover, the world tilted. She collapsed to the floor with a dull thud. Darkness. When she opened her eyes, she was still lying on the hardwood floor. The room was dim. Her head ached. She turned slightly and saw me, sitting in the chair just a few feet away. I hadn't moved, hadn't picked her up, hadn't offered her water or comfort. I just sat there, my hands resting on my knees, staring at her. She blinked back tears, struggling to sit up. Her voice trembled. You didn't even pick me up. I've been on the floor this whole time. My jaw tensed. My words came out low and sharp, each syllable deliberate. So you know what it feels like to be abandoned. She flinched. The words hit harder than a slap. Tears streamed down her face. She slowly, unsteadily got to her feet. She wiped her cheek and then met my eyes. Yes, she said, her voice broken. The child is Aaron's. She paused, the pain etched in every word. He's dying, and he wanted to be a father before he left. He wanted someone to carry on his lineage. My breathing grew heavier, but my posture didn't change. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them. My voice was bitter. So he wants his corrupted blood passed on to another, I said. Isn't that ironic? Penelope flinched. She had never imagined that I, the gentle, noble yacht, could mock Aaron's blood cancer, but I did. Penelope's eyes flashed with anger and desolation. Are you mocking his cancer? She said, her voice trembling. I smiled, slow and cruel. At least I'm honest. Not a homewrecker. She fell to her knees in front of me, her hands clasped, her face wet with tears. Please, Elliot, let me have this child. I'll take care of him. It was his last wish. He just wanted. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. You never asked me. I said, my voice flat, poisonous. You never asked me before you spread your legs for that piece of scum. So don't ask me to bless you for birthing a bastard. Penelope's breath hitched. She stared at me in horror, as if she didn't recognize the man before her. You're so cruel, she whispered. How can you talk like that? About an unborn child. I stood up slowly. The chair scraped lightly against the wood floor. I looked down at her, my face like stone. Let's go, I said. Let's go pay your lover a visit. I need to look him in the eye and ask him what it feels like to stab your best friend in the back. Penelope's voice broke. Please, Elliot, don't do this. Don't hurt him. He's dying. I tilted my head and smiled. Trust me, bitch. If I wanted him dead, he'd be dead already, I said, my voice like ice. But I want to see him live. I walked to the front door, grabbed my keys, and opened it. The porch light bathed me in a pale glow. Hen was just walking up the porch steps, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She saw her mother, red-eyed and on the floor, and me standing stiff as a board in the doorway. She froze. Did you tell him? She asked, her voice cautious. I turned my head slowly and looked directly into my daughter's eyes. I didn't speak. I smiled. And that smile was not her father's, not the one who used to sit on the porch swing and whistle while he worked, not the man who used to carry her on his shoulders during parades. That smile sent a chill down her spine. I nodded once, then again, slowly, and smiled one more time. Hen said nothing, just stepped aside. Penelope came out behind me moments later, shuffling, grabbing her purse with trembling hands. She opened the passenger door of the truck and slid in silently. The drive to Baksachi was silent. Not a word was exchanged between us. The radio was off. Only the hum of the tires on the road filled the silence. My eyes never left the road. My hands were steady on the wheel. Penelope glanced at me a few times, but there was no softness left in my expression, no trace of the man she had married. We arrived at the hospital just before 7 p.m. The parking lot lights flickered in the humid night air. I parked the truck, got out, and waited. Penelope hesitated, then followed me. Inside, the fluorescent glare of the hospital made everything seem sterile, surreal. I walked straight to the reception desk. "I'm here to see Aaron Walker," I said calmly. "I'm listed as an emergency contact." The nurse briefly looked him up on the screen, then nodded. "Room 214, down by the ICU." No questions, no delays. Penelope walked silently behind me as we made our way down the long, echoing hallway. The air felt colder here. My boots echoed against the linoleum floor. My expression didn't change. Penelope's eyes darted nervously, every nerve in her body tense. At the end of the hall, we turned left. Room 214. Inside room 214, the steady beep of machines and the faint hiss of oxygen filled the sterile air. Aaron Walker lay still in the hospital bed, his face gaunt, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. Clear tubes snaked across his arms, delivering what little help modern medicine could offer. An oxygen mask clung to his face, fogging slightly with each shallow breath. His eyes, though dim and ringed with fatigue, opened at the sound of footsteps. We entered with a measured calm, my boots tapping softly on the tiled floor. Penelope hesitated at the door, her eyes red, her lips trembling. I dragged a small metal stool across the floor with a long screech and placed it right beside the bed. I sat down, elbows on my knees, and leaned in close. Aaron blinked slowly, trying to focus. "Hey, buddy," I said quietly, the corners of my lips turning up in a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm here to tell you something." Aaron tried to speak, but the mask muffled his attempt. His brow furrowed in confusion. I continued in a soft, casual, almost friendly voice. "First of all," I said, "that bitch told me she's pregnant with your child." Aaron's eyes widened slightly. His head barely moved. I tilted my head. "Now listen very carefully. I'm going to make sure that child is born." "Do you know why, Aaron?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Because I want to see your son grow up without having anyone to call dad." Penelope gasped behind us, but I didn't turn. "I want him to wake up every day and feel that emptiness, that hole. He'll go to school and see other kids get picked up by their fathers, and he'll wait for someone who will never come." Aaron's hand twitched slightly on the blanket, but he was too weak to lift it. I smiled wider. "Oh, trust me, he'll be sad, very sad, because the man who donated his sperm to create him." I tapped the metal guardrail gently with my knuckle. "We'll die right here in this bed." I rose slightly, now hovering over Aaron, and Penelope laughed coldly. "She'll raise that bastard alone. She will never find another man to come and be a father to that child." Penelope covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. I looked back at Aaron, my voice now colder than the drip beside him. "Every man who enters her life after you," I said slowly, "will come, have sex with her, and then leave after using her." I turned my head slowly toward Penelope, my voice now lower, more poisonous than ever. "That woman," I said, pointing at her without taking my eyes off Aaron, "will be used like a tissue, and your bastard son will watch it happen. He will see men come and go. He will see how they treat her, and he will feel it." I took another step closer to Aaron's bed, my eyes sharp, deliberate. "He will be hurt day after day, and it will fill his heart with hatred, with rot, with evil. One day he will curse you, Aaron. He will curse the man who gave him life and the woman who destroyed her marriage just to bring him into this world. He will curse you both for giving him a pitiful, miserable existence." The monitor beside Aaron's bed began to shriek. First, a steady increase in beeps, then an erratic, rapid series. Aaron's chest began to heave. His breaths became shallow, fast. He clutched at the blanket, trying to speak, but no sound came out. His eyes bulged slightly behind the oxygen mask as panic took hold. His heart rate skyrocketed. "Sir, you need to back away now," a nurse shouted from the doorway. "Step away," a doctor commanded as several medical staff rushed into the room. I stood still, calm, unmoved. I looked down at Aaron one last time, my voice low enough for only Aaron to hear. "I came to watch you suffer and die." Then I turned, backing slowly into the hallway just outside the room. The glass door slid shut behind me. Through it, I stood like a statue, arms crossed, my eyes locked on Aaron's. Aaron's gaze didn't break either, even as the doctors swarmed around him, trying to stabilize him, adjusting the oxygen, preparing adrenaline, the machines screaming louder with each passing second. The two of us, once friends, brothers in all but blood, stared at each other through that thin pane of glass. Aaron's face began to contort in pain. The beeping turned into a flat, piercing tone. "He's flatlining," one of the doctors said grimly. "Time of death, 10:47. The room fell silent. A nurse stepped out into the hall slowly, shaking her head. "He's gone." I smiled and said it loud enough for Penelope to hear. "See you in hell, you bastard." She let out a choked cry, her knees giving out beneath her. She collapsed hard on the cold floor just outside the room. Her head hit the ground as she fainted again. I didn't flinch. I stepped aside mechanically, making way for the nurse who rushed to Penelope's side. She knelt, whispering to her softly, checking her pulse, offering support. I stood there silently, watching, unmoved, and let the nurse help Penelope. The nurse knelt beside Penelope as she cried on the cold hospital hallway floor. She looked up at me, as I stood nearby, calm and impassive. "Can you help her up?" the nurse asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. I smiled faintly, chillingly. "Her fall is her own," I said. "She needs to pick herself up. I am no longer her protector." The nurse gasped, horrified by my cruelty, but I simply turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing behind me like punctuation to my words. Outside, I pulled out my phone and called my mother. "Mom," I said, "Penelope is at Baylor Scott. Pick her up." Wait, what happened?" "What are you?" she began, but the line had already gone dead. The next morning, my truck was gone. My phone was off. For a week, no one heard from me. Milford whispered. Rumors bloomed like mold. Aaron Walker's death, Penelope's collapse, my disappearance. Then, as suddenly as I had left, I returned. That same day, a courier arrived at Penelope's door. In his hand, a sealed manila envelope, divorce papers. She read them silently, standing alone in the living room, her hands trembling. Her chest tightened. Tears fell freely, silently. She picked up her phone and tried to call me. Still off. At dusk, I came home, parked my truck, walked inside without a word, went to my room, and changed into a clean shirt. Then I went into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and sat on the edge of the dining table, sipping it slowly, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Within minutes, my parents and my in-laws arrived, alerted by Penelope's tearful calls and hand-scared messages. Grace stood in the doorway, pale and uncertain. Penelope's father, George Patterson, a soft-spoken man who rarely raised his voice, looked visibly shaken, and stood near the staircase, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face grief-stricken. Penelope entered last, her eyes bloodshot, her lips trembling. The tension was suffocating. Grace broke the silence. "Yet why? Why are you serving her with divorce papers?" George spoke next. "She's pregnant, son, and you're divorcing her. She's carrying your child, for God's sake." I took another slow sip of whiskey, the glass cradled in my fingers, then turned my gaze to Penelope. "Why don't you tell them?" I said. "Why don't you tell everyone here why I served you with those papers?" Penelope's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her lips trembled. She looked down. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks. I stood up, set the glass on the table, and turned to face George directly. "Your daughter," I said clearly, "slept with Aaron Walker and is pregnant with his child." Gasps echoed through the room. "So no," I continued, my voice calm but sharp. "Her condition, her well-being, and that child inside her are not my concern." I turned to my mother. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly agape. "Mom," I said softly, "that woman betrayed my trust. She betrayed my love." My tone never wavered. It was as if I were reading scripture. "I pray to God every day, and I wish her all the pain and all the suffering in the world." I want to see her suffer. I want to see her cry. I want to see her raise that bastard alone. And I want to live long enough to see that bastard curse her every day for his miserable existence. Grace took a step back, clutching her chest, her breath catching. She looked at me as if she were seeing a stranger. This was not the soft-spoken boy she had raised. This was not the man who saved people from burning houses, who fixed old wiring for free when people couldn't afford it, who loved with the kind of heart people write songs about. No, this man standing before her was cold, vengeful, filled with poison. And as the silence in the room thickened, Grace whispered, almost to herself, "What has happened to my son?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked at me, helpless. "He is full of hate." Grace took another step closer to Penelope, her face streaked with tears. She reached out a trembling hand, touching Penelope's arm as if hoping to somehow ease the weight crushing the younger woman's shoulders. Then she turned slowly back to me, her voice soft, pleading. "Elliot," she said, almost in a whisper, "is there any way at all that you can look past this? Can you forgive her? Save your marriage?" Her voice broke under the strain of her own disbelief, her own pain. "You've been married for over 20 years. You have a life together. A daughter. Please." My face was unreadable. I turned my head toward my mother and met her tearful eyes, but my own remained cold, distant. Then, without a word, I turned back to Penelope. George stepped forward quickly, his voice trembling but still firm. "Yet, the child is innocent," he said. "I know what she did was wrong, but please, you're a kind man. You always have been. Think of the child's health. If Penelope is under stress, it will harm the baby. It's not the baby's fault." I didn't respond immediately, just stared at Penelope, who stood frozen, her eyes swollen, her mouth slightly open as if she were about to speak, but couldn't find the strength. Every eye in the room was on me. Then I smiled. Not a kind smile, not the smile of the man the town loved, but the smile of someone who had burned the bridge, torn up the road, and salted the earth behind him. "Every second she is here," I said quietly, "I will continue to remind her that she is filthy." Penelope gasped, her knees trembling beneath her. "I will remind her that she destroyed over 2 decades of marriage just to satisfy a twisted desire for a man destined for hell who was not her husband." I stepped closer, not to threaten, but to ensure every word landed. "I would love to see her suffer." I turned my head slightly, my eyes still on her. "And that baby," I said, my voice low and steady. "I have no sympathy or affection. Nothing." My gaze hardened. "Whatever happens to it," I paused, "that is its destiny." Penelope crumpled to her knees. Her sobs erupted like floodwaters breaking a dam. She clutched her stomach, rocking slightly, unable to contain the agony that twisted through her body, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Her cries filled the room, raw and broken. I didn't flinch. I poured myself another glass of whiskey, the clink of ice and liquid strangely loud in the silence between her sobs. I leaned back on the couch, my legs crossed casually, my cold gaze unwavering. The chaos around me might as well have been birdsong. Across the room, Hen stood frozen near the stairs, watching me. I looked at her and smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was sharp and coiled like a snake dipped in venom. That smile didn't belong to the father who used to tuck her in at night or fix her bike chain in the driveway. It belonged to someone else, someone colder, someone darker. A shiver ran through her. She turned and backed silently up the steps, disappearing into her room, her heart pounding in her ears. George Patterson moved quickly, going to his daughter, who was now slumped on the floor. He looked down at her with eyes full of disgust and pity. He didn't speak immediately, just knelt and helped her to her feet. "We're leaving," he said sharply. Grace opened her mouth to object, but George shot her a firm look, and she stepped aside. Penelope didn't resist. She couldn't. She let her father guide her out of the house, her eyes glazed, her legs barely supporting her weight. George helped her into his car, closed the door behind her, and got in. The drive was silent. When they reached the Patterson house, George didn't even wait for Penelope to speak. As soon as she was sitting on the old living room couch, he turned on her. "You have killed a good man. And for what?" "Elliot was like a son to me. He was an honest and devoted husband," he growled, pacing back and forth. "You killed the soul of someone who would have given his last breath for you." Penelope sat still, her hands trembling in her lap. Her eyes stared at the floor. George's voice rose, his fury barely contained. Hell has a special place for women like you. If it's possible, abort the child and pray that he has mercy on you. Penelope flinched. Her doctor had already told her that at 45, the pregnancy was already risky. An abortion was even riskier. Besides, she never wanted an abortion. She had promised Aaron his child. George pointed a finger at her, stern and final. You will stay here temporarily, only until that baby is born. He moved closer, his voice now cold. And once it's born, you move out. Find your own way. 3 months later, the Baksashi courthouse was buzzing with a quiet tension. The news had spread throughout Milford that I, Jopp Brown, the quiet hero, the volunteer firefighter, the man everyone once admired, was divorcing my wife. But this wasn't just any divorce, it was a war. Penelope got out of her father's car, her pregnant belly now visibly round under her loose dress. She kept her chin high despite the shame she wore like a second weight. In her heart, she still believed somehow that she could fix it, that the court might order therapy, that if they forced me to sit with her in a room again, maybe I would remember the life we built. Maybe she would forgive me. Inside, the courtroom was small but packed. Curious eyes from the quiet corners of the town filled the benches. On one side, Penelope sat with her lawyer, her hands crossed protectively over her belly. On the other side, I entered moments later, immaculate in a black suit, my expression unreadable. My lawyer, Ron Jeremy, who had flown in by helicopter that morning, his reputation as a ruthless litigator preceding him, followed. The judge, an older gentleman with kind eyes, opened the session with a deep breath. He looked at Penelope, then at me, and back at the file. Penelope's lawyer stood first, speaking with urgency. Your Honor, in the interest of preserving a marriage that has lasted over 20 years, we ask the court to order mandatory marriage counseling before proceeding with any divorce decree. There was a long pause. The judge looked toward Penelope. His eyes softened. He nodded slightly, as if already considering it. But then Ron stood up. Your Honor, he said, his voice calm and authoritative. Marriage counseling, in this case, would be a waste of the court's time and the parties' money. The bond between these two has been irreparably broken, and I believe a few questions for Mrs. Brown will make that painfully clear. The judge raised an eyebrow. You're requesting a cross-examination now, Mr. Jeremy. Yes, Your Honor. Briefly, the judge paused, then nodded. Proceed. Penelope came forward and sat in the witness stand. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself. Ron approached slowly, his tone professional, but with a razor-sharp precision. Mrs. Brown, do you love your husband? Penelope answered without hesitation. Yes, more than my life. Ron nodded. Then he walked a few paces before turning sharply back to her. More than your life, he repeated, but not more than the promise you made to him when you were married, forsaking all others. Penelope's lips parted, but no words came out. Ron pressed on. You claim to love him, but the child you carry in your womb does not belong to your husband. This man you supposedly love more than your own life, he pointed out, his tone calm but biting. You are a liar, Mrs. Brown. You are here now before the court asking to save a marriage that you willingly destroyed. How can you look this court in the eye and say you want to fix a union when you brought another man into your bed? Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. Ron tilted his head slightly. Was it some unspoken desire, Mrs. Brown? He asked, his voice like a scalpel. A secret sexual fetish? To get pregnant by a dying man? Was it a twisted need to carry his legacy in your body at the cost of your husband's dignity? Objection, shouted Penelope's lawyer, getting to his feet. Your Honor, this is not a criminal trial. We are here to discuss reconciliation and the possibility of saving this marriage, not to humiliate the petitioner. Sustained, the judge said with a firm nod. Mr. Jeremy, please keep your comments relevant. Ron offered a faint, almost polite smile. Of course, Your Honor, he said, and then turned his gaze back to the stand. But before we talk about saving a marriage, perhaps we should first ask why it reached a point where it needed saving. He turned slowly to face Penelope once more. Who was responsible for bringing this marriage to this point? Ron Jeremy stepped forward, his sharp gaze fixed on Penelope, as the courtroom hung on every word. Mrs. Brown, he said, his tone cold but controlled. Why did you sleep with Mr. Walker? Penelope shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable. Her eyes darted to me, as I sat motionless, my jaw tight. Then she turned back to Ron, her voice trembling but firm. He told me. Aaron told me he wanted to be a father, that he didn't have much time left, and he wanted his lineage to continue. So, she swallowed hard. So I agreed. I slept with him and got pregnant. A low murmur went through the room. Ron raised an eyebrow. His lips curled into a sneer. What a noble cause, Mrs. Brown, he said, dripping with sarcasm. So what you're saying is you didn't cheat on your husband? No, you simply granted a dying man his last wish. Penelope looked up, her eyes wide. Yes. Ron stepped forward. His voice rose. By having sex with him and getting pregnant with his child. Penelope's face flushed, a mixture of shame and desperation. He wanted a child, she said, more firmly now, her frustration beginning to show. He could have adopted when he had the time, Ron snapped. His voice echoed off the courtroom walls. Do not insult this court with justifications for betrayal. Penelope looked down. Ron continued, pressing with precision. Let's move on. You got pregnant. Did you ever inform your husband before the pregnancy about this little plan to carry another man's child? Penelope hesitated. I told him about Aaron's wish. Ron leaned forward, his voice sharp. After you got pregnant, he said firmly. After. That's not telling, that's confessing. He turned to the judge for a moment, then back to Penelope. So no, your husband had no idea you were sleeping with that man. You excluded him, you broke your vows, and now. Ron clasped his hands together, his tone shifting to something softer but no less pointed. Now, Mrs. Brown, a very important question. What is a father? Is it the man who donates his sperm, or is it the man who raises the child? Penelope opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She seemed lost, drowning in the silence of the room. Ron didn't wait. You knew Aaron would die. You knew he could never raise that child, and yet you went ahead. So tell us, Mrs. Brown, was it your plan all along to trap Mr. Brown into raising a child that was not his? Penelope's voice broke as she answered. Elliot is an excellent husband and a great father. The child would have been lucky to have him. Ron leaned in slightly, his voice low but razor sharp. So let me get this straight. You wanted to present your husband with a child you had with another man and expected him to raise it as his own, without his knowledge, without his consent. He straightened up. His final words were clear and deliberate. How fair is that? Considering Mr. Brown had no idea you were sleeping with another man. He paused, then delivered the blow. That's parental fraud, Mrs. Brown. The room buzzed with stifled murmurs. A wave of discomfort swept through the onlookers like a cold wind. Ron Jeremy's last words still hung faintly in the air. Parental fraud, Mrs. Brown. And even the judge seemed visibly unsettled, shifting slightly in his chair. Penelope sat with trembling hands, her face pale and drawn. Her lawyer was on his feet quickly. Objection, Your Honor, he said, trying to regain control. My client had no intention of trapping anyone. This was never malicious. This marriage deserves to be saved. They have been together for over 2 decades. Ron didn't let him finish. He turned swiftly, cutting in with a cool, measured voice. This marriage needed honesty, Your Honor, it needed trust. It needed the very things upon which any marriage is built. He stepped forward again, his words slicing through the room like a blade. All this marriage received from Mrs. Brown was betrayal and deceit. He paused deliberately, letting the words sink in. The room was silent again. Your Honor, Ron continued, his tone now shifting from sharp to firm. I recommend that this marriage be dissolved. Let both parties move on with their lives. To force these two to be together any longer would be a cruelty disguised as reconciliation. It would only deepen the wounds and prolong the inevitable suffering. The judge leaned back, troubled. He looked at Penelope, visibly pregnant, trembling, her eyes hollow. Then at me, stoic, still quiet. There was a long pause. The judge sighed. While the arguments presented are compelling, Texas law grants the court discretion to attempt reconciliation when it believes the marriage could still be saved. He looked at both lawyers, then at us. I am ordering mandatory therapy sessions for the next 90 days. We will reconvene after that period. A stunned silence followed. Ron's jaw tightened. He turned slowly to look at me and saw my expression had changed. A smile. It wasn't joyful, it wasn't kind, it was slow, deliberate, cruel. The smile of a man who knew he had gotten what he wanted, exactly what Ron had hoped to avoid. Ron swallowed hard and turned to look at Penelope. He walked over slowly, leaned in, and spoke in a low, measured tone that only she could hear. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Brown. I wanted you to be safe, but I guess I failed." He straightened up. "Good luck with that therapy session." Penelope didn't look at him. Her eyes remained on her hands, clasped over her swollen belly. Ron turned and walked back toward me. I was still smiling, savoring the victory I hadn't even voiced. Ron had known it from the first moment we sat together in his office. The calmness in my voice as I explained what had happened, the way I detailed the timeline, the betrayal, the truth behind the pregnancy, without raising my voice, without trembling. That calmness scared Ron because it wasn't the calm of a man holding himself together. It was the calm of a man who had already burned everything down inside and was now walking through the ashes without a single shred of regret. Ron had wanted the divorce finalized quickly, cleanly, coldly, done. But fate has its own plans. The therapy session took place in a modest, softly lit office on the second floor of a quiet clinic just outside of Baksachi. The furniture was deliberately unthreatening. Muted tones, soft cushions, a box of tissues placed neatly on the table between us. The atmosphere was meant to invite healing, but the air inside the room was tense. Dr. Paul Kersey, a quiet, middle-aged man with silvering hair and glasses, sat with a notepad in his lap. He observed Penelope and me silently before speaking. "Well," he began gently, "let's start with something simple. I'd like to hear what each of you hopes to achieve from these sessions." Penelope looked at Dr. Kersey immediately, her hands resting on the curve of her belly. "I want to save my marriage," she said, her voice soft but trembling. "I want Yat to understand that he is the only man I have ever truly loved. I made a mistake, an emotional one, but I want him to see that I never stopped loving him." She turned slightly toward me, her eyes pleading. "I want us to raise this child together. I know he isn't his by blood, but Aaron's last wish was to be a father, and I just want Yat to help me honor that. We've built a life, a family. I am begging for a second chance." Dr. Kersey nodded thoughtfully, scribbling a quick note. "Thank you, Penelope." Then he turned to me. I had remained reclined in my chair, my arms crossed loosely, my eyes unreadable. "And you, Mr. Brown, what do you want from these sessions?" I smiled. Not warmly. It was a slow, deliberate expression that made even Dr. Kersey pause. "I am here," I said calmly, "to tell Penelope how I feel." I turned slightly toward her, not with cruelty, but with a cold distance. "And how I feel about her unborn child." Dr. Kersey looked between us again, tapping his pen gently against the pad. "All right, then let's start with Penelope's position." He leaned forward a little, focusing on her again. "Penelope, why do you believe your husband should take on the responsibility of raising a child that is not biologically his?" Penelope hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Why Yat? He is a good man, a decent man. He has been the most loving husband, the most incredible father to Han. He is everything a man should be. I know what I did was wrong, but I also know the kind of heart he has. If anyone can give this child a chance, it's him." My eyes narrowed. I let out a short, dry laugh-like sigh before shaking my head. Then, with deliberate slowness, I turned my eyes to Dr. Kersey and said, "So the lesson here is, be a good guy, and you'll become a cuckold with a point." Penelope flinched at the word. The room fell into a heavy silence. Dr. Kersey sighed, adjusted his glasses, and turned fully toward me. "Mr. Brown," he said, his voice firm but calm, "I actually intended to let your wife finish sharing her side first, but I see it's time we heard yours." He leaned forward slightly, pen poised. "You mentioned you have feelings to share." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on Penelope. "I hate her," I said. My voice was low, steady, but filled with something raw and unfiltered. Not casually, not quietly. I hate her with every fiber of my being. Penelope flinched. Dr. Kersey looked up slowly from his notes. "Until the day I die," I continued, "I will carry that hate." Dr. Kersey was silent for a moment. Then he asked calmly, "Mr. Brown, you say you hate her, but do you believe holding on to that hate helps either of you? Especially when there's a child involved." I turned to him, a faint, bitter smile pulling at my mouth. It wasn't joy. It was the grimace of a man whose heart had been shattered so thoroughly that he could feel nothing but the shards. That child, I said, I never asked for it to exist. It is the manifestation of my wife's betrayal, a living embodiment of her sins. To me, it is not just a child. It is the sinister reminder, the proof. Every breath it takes, every milestone, every birthday, will remind me that my wife betrayed me and destroyed my family and my marriage. As it grows, so will my hatred for this woman and that child. Penelope's tears were silent now. They streamed down her cheeks, unchecked. Her hands trembled as she kept them on her stomach. Dr. Kersey leaned forward gently, his tone still calm. I can't hear how much you are hurting, Mr. Brown, but the anger you're carrying, if you let it fester like this, it could poison everything around you. I sat still for a moment, then let out a short, bitter laugh. Poison, I repeated. Doctor, I am the poison. I have lost who I was now. My faith, my peace, my humanity, all gone. I turned slowly toward Penelope, my voice quiet, even disarmingly so. May I ask her some questions? Dr. Kersey looked at Penelope, then nodded cautiously. If it is respectful and helps you process, go ahead. I turned to face her fully. Penelope's eyes were already wet, her expression strained. Was he good in bed? Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy it while your husband was at home depressed and alone in his bed? Did it give you pleasure, memories you can take to your grave? She tried to speak, but I cut her off, gently but firmly. You are not stupid enough to get pregnant just for a dying man. You can fool the whole world, but not me. You had sex with him because you wanted to have sex with him. Your pregnancy is just a play to win the world's sympathy. I still remember Aaron's eyes when I told him about the pregnancy. He had surprise in his eyes, not recognition. So, Penelope, that lie about Aaron having a last wish, I don't buy it. I believe you are a liar, and you just wanted to have sex with a dying man. Penelope's lips trembled. Her body gave way. She slid from her chair to her knees, sobbing, shaking uncontrollably. Her voice came out broken and shattered. I was in love with him. The words hit the room like a gunshot. She cried harder, curling up on the floor. I don't know when it happened, but it wasn't just pity, it wasn't just kindness. He was dying, and I thought, she gasped. I thought it was my last chance to feel close to him, to hold him. I didn't think about what it meant. I just felt it. Dr. Kersey remained still, not judging, just listening. I stood up slowly, adjusting the cuffs of my shirt. My expression didn't change. No visible surprise, no further anger, just a calm, cold resolve. I turned to Dr. Kersey. This session is over. And without another word, I walked out of the room. 2 days had passed since the therapy session. The house was lit up for Han's 18th birthday, glowing against the dark expanse of rural Milford. Balloons and streamers adorned the living room. A modest cake sat on the kitchen table, and soft music played in the background. From the outside, it looked like any other family gathering. Inside, however, every guest was walking on eggshells. Grace sat quietly by the couch, clutching a gift bag. George Patterson, more somber than ever, stood in the kitchen, his arms crossed. Penelope lingered near the back, her expression anxious. She hadn't dared to speak much since she arrived. I, cold and calm, moved through the house like a man performing a duty, smiling just enough, saying just enough. It was I who planned the entire gathering. I spent hours decorating the house with balloons. They had all read my message. I have an announcement to make. Please join us for Han's birthday. Even Penelope was invited. Hope filled the air, dangerously fragile. Grace believed I might be on the path to forgiveness. George prayed silently that the worst was over. Even Penelope, who hadn't dared to dream, felt a flicker of possibility. But I said nothing, just kept pouring drinks, watching the evening unfold like a play I'd already seen before. It wasn't until the cake was brought out and everyone gathered around the table that I finally stepped forward. Go ahead, sweetheart, I said to Han, my voice serene. Make a wish. Han, beaming and hopeful, closed her eyes and leaned in, blowing out the candles. Everyone clapped. Grace leaned in, smiling. What did you wish for, baby? Han blushed slightly, then looked at me. I wish that our family could be together again, that you and Mom could find your way back. My expression didn't change. I just nodded and walked into the kitchen. I poured myself a drink. Whiskey, neat, no ice. The glass clinked lightly against the counter. I returned, took a seat at the head of the table, and looked at my daughter. "Welcome to adulthood, Han," I said, raising my glass. "It's not as sweet as cake." Everyone fell silent. The smile vanished from Han's face. "You see," I continued, swirling my drink. "This is a world where wishes mean absolutely nothing. What you hope for, useless. What you want, irrelevant. This world only responds to action." I set the glass down with a thud. Good deeds get good results. Bad choices. I looked at Penelope. Now, very bad consequences. Han's voice trembled. "Dad, I was just saying it would mean a lot to me if we could be together again." I smiled, but it was an empty smile, hollow, poisoned. "And that's where you still don't get it," I said. "Your wishes aren't worth a damn thing." Silence. I stood up, placed both hands on the table, and leaned forward. "Your mother and I are done. It's over. There is no fixing this. There is no going back. There is no family as you remember it. That died the moment she spread her legs for that decaying worm." Penelope looked away, trying not to cry. Grace covered her mouth. George clenched his jaw. I turned to Han. My voice now dropped to a low, steady, chilling calm. "You see, tonight isn't about her or me. It's about you." I pointed upstairs. "Go. Pack your bags." Han blinked. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "Pack your things." She stared at me, stunned. "Why? What? What are you saying?" I stepped back, finished the last of my whiskey, and spoke clearly. "Get out of my house." Han stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, words unable to form. Her eyes darted from me to her mother, to her grandmother, to anyone who could stop this from being real. But I wasn't finished. "Don't be so surprised, dear daughter," I said, moving closer, my voice sharp as a knife's edge. You knew what she did. You knew she betrayed me, and you said nothing? That makes you an accomplice." Han shook her head, tears welling up. "Dad, I didn't choose." "Yes, you did." I cut her off. "You chose to protect her. You let me live in the dark like a fool. You chose a side. I stepped closer, and you chose wrong." Penelope gasped silently, her hand flying to her mouth. Grace looked like she had stopped breathing. "And your college fund," I continued, cold and measured. "It's gone. Liquidated. My lawyer took care of it last week. It rests in her account now." Han's hands trembled. "What?" she whispered. "What are you talking about?" "You heard me," I said. "Good luck getting a job, finding an apartment. That's adulthood, honey. It comes with responsibilities. The biggest one." I tapped my chest. "That is to yourself. I forgot that once. I paid the price." I looked her in the eye, and this time there was no poison, just a bone-deep emptiness. "Learn from me. Don't make the same mistake." A heavy pause. "That's my last life lesson for you." I looked around the table, then stepped back. The party's over. The air was so thick with tension it felt like breathing through smoke. Then Grace stepped forward, her face red with rage. Without a word, she raised her hand and slapped me across the face. The crack echoed in the room. "You are heartless," she said through gritted teeth. "You are a monster." I didn't flinch, just turned my head slowly and smiled. Not at Grace, but at Penelope. A cruel, knowing smile. Penelope looked down, trembling. George Patterson, still silent, finally lowered his head and turned to his daughter. His voice was tired. "Plan. Go upstairs, get your things. Are you coming home?" Penelope nodded wordlessly and walked toward the stairs. Grace turned to Han and took her gently by the shoulder. "Come on, honey, you can stay with me." Han didn't speak, just walked, eyes blank, guided by her grandmother's hand. No one looked back. No one said goodbye. They all left in silence. The second therapy session was scheduled for a rainy Thursday afternoon. The clock ticked past the appointed hour, but only one chair was occupied. I sat across from Dr. Paul Kersey, my legs crossed, hands clasped in my lap. A slow, steady smile spread across my face, like a man who had already won a war. "She's not coming," I said flatly, looking at the clock. "I guess that tells you everything you need to know." Dr. Kersey nodded silently, jotting something down. "Sometimes people need more time." I scoffed. Time? She had 22 years. The room was thick with stillness. "Do you still think I did wrong?" I continued, tilting my head. "Do you think I went too far by getting rid of that bitch?" Dr. Kersey kept his expression neutral. "Divorce is your right, Elliot. No one is questioning that. What concerns me is the hatred. You're carrying so much of it. That kind of weight," He hesitated. It doesn't just poison your mind. It will consume your health too. I leaned forward. The smile never left my face. It's not confined within my heart, I said quietly. I make sure to share it with everyone around me. It was at that moment that Dr. Kersey leaned back, unease flickering in his eyes. He closed his notebook, slowly set down his pen. Elliot, I believe we're done here. He stood up, composed but clearly disturbed. Later that night, he submitted his report to the court. This marriage is beyond reconciliation. There is no remorse, only bitterness. There is too much hate to overcome. The judge received the report, read it, and with little deliberation, approved the divorce decree. Penelope didn't show up in court, didn't contest it, didn't send a lawyer. She just legally faded away. She still received half of my savings. Half of my 401k. It was the law. I didn't argue, didn't protest. I signed the papers with a single stroke of the pen. I was more than happy to let it go. The courthouse steps were quiet as Ron Jeremiah and I walked out. The wind was gentle, the air strangely still. We didn't speak at first, just walked together across the street to a small park bench under a dying oak tree. The leaves overhead rustled dryly in the wind, as if mimicking the silence between us. I sat down with a long sigh, my hands on my knees. I guess this is it. So, I said, you're off to save another husband. I'm off to live what's left of this life. Ron let out a dry laugh. Yeah, I guess I go where the pain is. Plenty of work for me. We sat there for another minute. Then we both stood up. Ron offered his hand. I shook it. Take care, Mr. Brown, Ron said, turning to leave. I felt, turned too, and started walking, but after a few steps, Ron stopped. He turned back. Mr. Brown, he called out. I turned my head. Yeah, I might ask you for a favor. I smiled faintly. Sure. Ron looked thoughtful, almost unsure for the first time. Not now? I'll be back. I'll talk to you in detail. I nodded once. I'll be here. We parted ways. Months passed. Spring melted into summer. The divorce was done. The house was quiet. Then the call came. It was Grace. She sounded tired, older than I remembered. She gave birth, she said quietly. I didn't respond. The baby is a boy. Still silence on the line. He's in an incubator, she continued. The delivery was hard. Penelope, she's not doing well. I said nothing. Grace swallowed, and just as she was about to speak again, click, the line went dead. I had hung up. Back at the hospital, doctors surrounded Penelope with clinical concern. Her body, already weakened by stress, betrayal, emotional collapse, couldn't hold on. The baby, small and frail, struggled inside the glass box. Wires covered his chest, tubes fed his lungs. 2 days later, the doctors approached Penelope with grim faces. Your son, one of them said gently, has a congenital heart defect. It's genetic. His heart is too weak. Penelope closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't ask which gene or whose fault it was. She just nodded faintly. On the 5th day, the monitors went flat. The child passed away without a sound. They told Penelope gently. She didn't scream. She didn't move. Her eyes just stared at the ceiling. Within hours, her vital signs began to drop. Her pulse grew weak. The on-call doctor saw the signs. Get a crash cart, he shouted. Her heart. But it was already breaking. They called it Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, broken heart syndrome. Penelope Brown died 7 days after her son. She died without family, without forgiveness, and without ever hearing my voice again. And filled with the same hatred that had once filled my heart. But it wasn't directed at the world, or even at her mother. It was aimed solely at me. She never forgot that night, her 18th birthday, the moment I shattered every remaining illusion she had of love, family, or even basic human decency. I had humiliated her, disowned her. She had only asked for peace. She left one morning with no letter, no phone call, no forwarding address. She packed a single bag, caught a bus, and disappeared. Some said she went to Dallas. Others thought maybe Houston, but no one knew for sure. Grace tried. She called me the next night, her voice trembling. She's gone, Elliot. Your daughter is gone. There was silence on the other end of the line. Grace waited for something. Anything. I said nothing. Then, click, I had hung up. After that, Grace stopped calling. Life went on, though not in any real way. The house grew silent, not peaceful, just lifeless. I barely went out. No new jobs, No visits to the fire station, no volunteer calls. The neighbors noticed, but no one said a word. The man who once saved lives now spoke to no one. Then that night came, a cold wind pushing against the windows. The world outside was still. The whiskey bottle beside me was nearly empty. One hand held the glass, the other, a small revolver. I sat alone in my living room. The only light flickered from a floor lamp with a crooked shade. In front of me hung the only photograph left in the house. Penelope, hand myself. I raised the gun slowly. Not to myself. Not yet. Boom. The bullet shattered the glass frame, splitting Penelope's face in half. I put down the glass, steadied it, and brought the revolver to my temple. Just then, the doorbell rang. I held the position for another moment, hands steady. Then I lowered the gun, took a long, slow sip of my whiskey, and drained it. I looked at the gun one more time. I'll empty you soon, I muttered, my voice flat as concrete. I stood up and walked to the door. When I opened it, Ron Jeremy was there in his black coat, smiling like a man who knew the timing mattered. I guess I'm just in time, Ron said, his tone calm and practiced. I looked at him, eyes empty, jaw tight. Then, for the first time in weeks, the corner of my mouth lifted slightly. I guess a little early. Ron stepped through the door and stopped. His eyes immediately fell on the shattered photo frame on the floor, Penelope's face fractured behind the glass. He inhaled deeply and caught the sharp, acrid smell in the air. Gunpowder. He turned sharply to me, his voice low but urgent. Damn it. You were right, Ron muttered. I am a little early, and I'm glad I came. I gave him a tired, hollow, but honest smile. Without asking, Ron came in further, took off his coat, and draped it over the back of a chair. I need a glass of whiskey, he said. But you are going to have some lemon water, and you're going to sit down, you're going to shut up, and you're going to listen to me loud and clear. I raised an eyebrow, but there was no defiance in it, just a subtle nod. Moments later, Ron had a glass in his hand, ice clinking as he took a sip. I returned with a glass of lemon water, and the two of us went out to the back porch. The backyard was quiet under the night sky. A few crickets chirped somewhere in the distance. The two of us sat at opposite ends of an old wooden bench, the kind I had built years ago with my own hands. For nearly an hour, we talked, no shouting, no crying, just two men, one broken, the other trying to patch something together. Ron laid it all out. Something big, something that needed someone like me, someone who was done with everything, someone with nothing left to lose, but maybe, just maybe, something to gain back. By the time Ron was finished speaking, I was staring out at the dark line of trees behind my property. I didn't speak right away, but when I did, my voice was steady. Okay. We stood up together. Ron held out his hand. I shook it, firm and final. Ron went outside to wait by his black car. The air was cool and crisp. It was a few minutes before I came out of the house, a small duffel bag slung over my shoulder. I looked back at the house, my home for so long, the broken windows, the burnt-out porch light, the cracked door frame. This place was no longer a home, just a tomb for what once was. I turned to Ron, nodded once, and walked to the car. The drive to the nearest airfield was silent. The moon hung low when we arrived. The rotors of the helicopter Ron had chartered for this trip were already spinning, a soft, mechanical whirring filling the air. Without a word, we climbed aboard. 3 hours later, outside Ron's house, the air was lighter here, less heavy than the silence that usually filled my home. We went inside together. Ron pushed the front door open with a familiar groan and led me down the hall to a modest bedroom. The room was quiet, and in the center, lying in a single bed, was Jerry. The boy didn't move as we entered. 10 years old, pale, his eyes too wary for someone so young. Ron walked to the edge of the bed and offered a soft smile. Jerry, he said gently, I brought someone for you to meet. Jerry didn't even blink. I stepped forward slowly, no rush in my walk, no forced cheer. I knelt by the bed, elbows on my knees, and looked at the boy. Hey kid, I said, my voice raspy but warm. Ever hear of a show called 2.5 Men? Jerry turned his head slightly, just enough to show he was listening. Well, I continued. Here we are, two adult idiots and you. Looks like we got our own damn version. Jerry's eyes flickered to me for a second, then back to the wall. Ron sighed under his breath and stepped out of the room, leaving us in that still, unresolved silence. A few minutes later, I joined him in the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, twisted off the cap, and took a long drink before sitting across from Ron at the small wooden table. He hates you, I said dryly. Ron didn't seem offended, just nodded, his shoulders slumped with the weight of 2 years of failure. The same hatred you had for your wife, he said quietly. I laughed, not a sharp laugh, but something more human than anything that had come out of me in months. Yeah, I said, shaking my head. Exactly the same. Ron leaned back in his chair. I've tried everything, man. I just can't get through to him. I looked up at the ceiling, exhaled, and then brought my gaze back to Ron. You did good, I said. Both of us, the boy and me, we have something in common. Ron gave me a skeptical look. Oh yeah? What's that? I smiled. This time it wasn't cold, but sad, almost peaceful. We're full of hate, I said. I guess that gives us a place to start. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then slowly, the corner of his mouth turned up. I hope you're right. There was a long pause between us. Comfortable, real. Ron turned toward the kitchen window. Outside, in the morning light, a small butterfly danced through the garden and fluttered gently into the sunlight.